Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are undertaking a really critical piece of spiritual engineering, you might say. We're tackling one of the most potent universal forces within the human heart, wrath. This is the emotion that seems to burn hottest, doesn't it? Whether it's, visible fury in big conflicts or just that silent, grinding resentment you carry through your workday.
Absolutely. It feels inescapable sometimes.
It really does. This inner fire.
Yeah.
It feels like a constant.
It is. And it's really critical, I think, that we start by defining how our sources understand this passion. We're drawing heavily today from the Catholic spiritual and philosophical tradition, especially St. Thomas Aquinas.
Right, the angelic doctor.
Exactly. And he teaches us something crucial right off the bat. The passion of anger itself, the raw feeling, as God inscribed it in our nature, it's not intrinsically evil.
That's huge, because I think most people just assume anger is bad.
Right. But it's actually part of our, let's call it, psychological toolkit, given to us precisely for confronting and overcoming things we perceive as evil or harmful.
Okay, so that completely changes the mission then. The goal isn't some kind of, forced squidic apathy, like trying to annihilate anger, pretend we don't feel frustrated or offended.
Precisely. No, that would actually be doing violence to our own nature, wouldn't it?
Right.
The real goal is redemption and ordering.
Redemption and ordering, okay.
Yeah, it's about taking that raw, sometimes really destructive force and using grace to bring it under the governance of reason enlightened by faith, and crucially, by charity.
So we're not trying to, turn off the heat. We're learning how to channel it.
You got it. Transforming what can be a destructive explosion into ideally a catalyst for real justice or zeal for truth, or even defending what's genuinely good.
Learning how to feel correctly. Wow. That feels like a really profound mission. It's not just anger management in the pop psychology sense.
Not at all. It's deeper.
So we're essentially mapping out a spiritual journey here today, starting with diagnosis, moving to healing, and then strengthening the soul against this.
That's the plan.
And you mentioned St. Thomas Aquinas. We're relying on his framework, his precision for this task.
Yes. The Thomistic key, as you called it earlier, it's invaluable because it lets us make these vital distinctions that are just necessary for any real spiritual progress.
Like what kind of distinctions?
Well, distinguishing the passion itself, the raw feeling, from the moment that passion crosses over into actual sin, and then also distinguishing both of those from that rare but sometimes necessary thing called virtuous zeal or holy wrath.
Ah, okay.
Without that Thomistic framework, honestly, it all just looks like a confusing, angry mess. It's hard to know what you're even dealing with.
Makes sense.
Oh.
Okay, let's dive into section 1 then. Understanding anger, passion, sin, and virtuous zeal. Where do we start with Aquinas' view of the soul's machinery? Where does anger fit in his anthropology?
Right. So St. Thomas talks about the sensitive appetite that's a part of us, below pure intellect, where we experience drives, passions, emotions. And he divides the sensitive appetite into two main powers. First, there's the concupiscible appetite. This is the power that moves us toward what we perceive as delightful or good.
So like desires for pleasure, comfort, food, that sort of thing. The pull towards something nice.
Exactly. It's the attraction system. But then, and this is key for us today, there's the irascible appetite. The appetitus irascibilis.
Irascible. Okay, what does that one do?
This is the power that moves us to resist and overcome things we perceive as harmful, difficult, or obstacles standing in the way of achieving some difficult good.
Ah, so it's the fighter in us.
Sort of, yeah. If the concupiscible says, ooh, I want that good thing, the irascible kicks in when there's a challenge. It says, I will fight for that good thing. Or maybe I will fight against whatever is stopping me from getting it or whatever is hurting me.
And anger is the specific feeling associated with that irascible power.
It's the primary natural act of that irascible appetite when faced with a perceived evil or obstacle. It's like the energy reserve designed to propel us past difficulty to overcome resistance.
So if you think about it, anger is kind of built in as a survival mechanism, isn't it? An engine to push back against bad things or strive for hard things.
Absolutely. I mean, imagine if we didn't have any capacity for this kind of response. We might not resist injustice effectively. We might just give up when pursuing difficult but important goods.
Would you just roll over?
Pretty much. But here's the crucial Thomistic point. The principle of order. This powerful engine, this irascible appetite, is naturally meant to be subject to human reason.
Okay, reason is the driver.
Reason is the rightful driver. So when anger is perfectly in line with reason, meaning it's proportional to the actual offense, and it's aiming for a genuinely just end, then it's good and natural.
And when does it go wrong?
It goes wrong when it rebels, when it refuses to be governed by reason, by prudence, by faith, by charity. When it just takes over, that's when it becomes disordered, contrary to our nature as rational beings, and that's when it becomes sinful.
Hey, this is where it gets really practical for, everyday life.
Right.
How does St. Thomas break down when this movement of anger becomes morally compromised? When does it cross that line into sin? He details this in the Summa, right?
He does. Question 158, for those keeping score at home. He basically gives two main ways anger becomes sinful. The first way is by its object.
By its object. Meaning what exactly? What you're angry about.
Precisely. It's an error of aim. The sin happens when the angry person desires an unjust vengeance.
Okay, unjust vengeance. What does that look like?
It could mean wanting to punish someone who actually doesn't deserve it. Or maybe they deserve some correction, but you desire a punishment that's way over the top, excessive.
Like wanting someone fired for spilling coffee on you.
Exactly. Or, and this is really crucial, the anger is sinful if the end you're seeking isn't correction or restoring justice, but it's purely about your own satisfaction, or worse, it comes from a place of hatred for the person.
So it's about the why behind the desire for punishment.
Yes. Is it aimed at fixing something, or just hurting someone because they hurt your feelings or your pride? If it's the latter, it directly opposes charity.
That sounds like that internal smoldering anger. Someone cuts you off in traffic and you spend the next 10 minutes mentally wishing disaster upon them. Not correction, just ruin.
That's a perfect example. That desire is aimed squarely at their misfortune, not any kind of justice. That's sin by object.
Okay. What's the second way anger becomes sinful?
The second way, and maybe this is even more common for many of us, is by its mode, by the manner in which the anger manifests itself.
So here, maybe the reason for the anger is okay, but how you express it is the problem.
Exactly. The object might be objectively fine. Let's say a parent needs to correct a child for serious misbehavior, or a citizen is rightly upset about genuine corruption they see. The initial reason for the feeling is just.
Right.
But the passion itself becomes disordered in its expression. It becomes excessively vehement, too strong or too swift, too impetuous. It basically overpowers the judgment of reason.
The emotion hijacks the brain, basically.
That's a good way to put it. Think about classic road rage again. Maybe someone did cut you off dangerously. Your initial frustration might be justified, that's the object. But when you start leaning on the horn endlessly, screaming abuse, maybe even tailgating them aggressively, the mode of your anger has become completely unruly. It clouds your judgment, makes you act irrationally, maybe even dangerously yourself. St. John Chrysostom had that great line, "Nothing is more repulsive than the look of an angry man." That loss of composure, that visible distortion, it's a sign that reason has lost the reins.
Right. And understanding the gravity here is important, isn't it? Because sometimes we think, it's just a little flare-up. But the line between venial and mortal sin seems relevant here.
It is. Aquinas is clear. The difference often lies in the gravity of the matter and the degree of consent from the will.
Okay.
So maybe you mutter a curse under your breath when someone annoys you. A sudden movement of passion, quickly regretted, maybe not fully consented to, that's likely venial. The matter is light, the consent imperfect. But if the matter is grave, say, you deliberately consent to and entertain a desire for someone's serious harm, their death, or you cultivate a deep, lasting hatred for them, and you do this with full awareness and consent of your will, that's where you cross into mortal sin.
Because you're fundamentally violating charity in a serious way. Our Lord himself linked that kind of anger to murder in the Sermon on the Mount, didn't he?
He did, Matthew 5.22. He raises the stakes incredibly high, showing that the internal disposition, the harbored anger and contempt, is spiritually lethal. It's not just about the external act.
Wow. Okay. Now, there's a really subtle but important point in the sources about the hierarchy of vices. It sounds counterintuitive, but St. Thomas argues that anger, even sinful anger, isn't actually the most grievous sin. How can that be? Surely fury causes immense damage.
It does cause huge damage, no question. But the ranking depends on the formal object of the sin, what the will is fundamentally aiming at. With anger, even disordered anger, the person desires punishment for the offender. Now, punishment is an evil for the person receiving it, obviously. But the angry person usually desires this evil under the aspect of a good.
What does that mean under the aspect of a good?
It means they perceive it, however wrongly, as a form of justice, or as restoring their own honor or setting things right. Their perception is flawed, their motive might be selfish, but they're still framing the desire for punishment in terms of achieving some kind of perceived good, like vengeance or distorted justice.
Okay, so the intent is corrupt, but it's still disguised, even to themselves, as something justifiable.
Often, yes. Now compare that to hatred or envy. According to Aquinas, these vices desire the evil of another person for its own sake, simply as evil.
How so?
Hatred wishes ill upon someone simply because their existence or their happiness is seen as an obstacle to one's own, or worse, just because they are good, and that goodness is found intolerable. There's no pretense of justice there. It's a direct desire for the other's harm as harm.
That's junk.
It is. And St. Augustine used that powerful analogy. Anger is like a speck in the eye, but hatred is like a beam. It's fundamentally worse, spiritually speaking, to desire evil purely as evil, which is what hatred does, than to desire an evil punishment under the distorted guise of a good, like vengeance.
That really clarifies things. It helps you diagnose your own internal state. Is this a hot flash of wanting to get even anger? Or is it a cold, settled wish for someone's suffering? Hatred.
Exactly. And the second one indicates a much deeper spiritual sickness.
Which leads perfectly into the idea that if we don't catch anger early, it tends to, well, metastasize.
Yeah.
St. Gregory the Great talked about the daughters of anger, didn't he? The sins that typically flow from unchecked wrath.
He did. It's a brilliant piece of spiritual psychology, almost like a diagnostic flowchart. If you let anger take root, these are the likely consequences, the habitual offspring.
This seems like a really useful tool for self-examination. Can we walk through these daughters? What's the first one?
The first is often indignation. This isn't necessarily righteous indignation yet. It's more like the internal grumbling, the dwelling on the offense. You keep replaying it, thinking about how unworthy the person was to treat you that way. It's nursing the grievance.
Okay, the mental replay loop.
Yeah.
What comes after indignation festers?
That leads to the swelling of the mind. This is where the indignation puffs you up. It creates a kind of internal, boastful boldness. You start to feel entitled to revenge. You might start plotting, planning how you'll get back at them.
The silent war room in your head, drawing up battle plans.
Precisely. And then, inevitably, the anger starts to spill outwards. The next daughter is clamor.
Clamor, loud noises.
Yes, disordered, confused noise. Shouting, yelling, raising your voice aggressively. Often it's not even coherent argument, just pure volume expressing the pent-up passion. Think of a shouting match where no one is listening.
We see that everywhere. Road rage, family arguments, online comment sections, just heat and noise, often regretted later because nothing constructive happened.
Exactly. And from generalized noise, it often gets personal. The next daughter is contumely.
Contumely, that's an older word.
It means insulting language directed specifically against your neighbor. Verbal abuse, name-calling, sarcasm designed to wound, using words to deliberately demean and degrade the other person.
So it's weaponized words.
Yeah.
Again, very common in modern discourse, unfortunately. Attacking the person, not the issue.
Terribly common. Then Gregory points to something even more serious. Blasphemy.
Blasphemy. How does anger lead to blasphemy?
When the anger becomes so intense, so consuming, it's not just directed at the person who offended you anymore. It gets directed upwards against fate, against God's providence, sometimes even directly against God himself. Cursing God, railing against him for allowing this suffering or this offense to happen to me.
Wow, that's anger mixed with extreme pride, isn't it? Telling the Creator he got it wrong.
It's a very dark place. And finally, the progression often culminates in strife or brawling.
So physical conflict.
Yes. Disputes escalating into actual fighting, physical violence. It's the external physical manifestation of the internal disorder. This whole list shows how a small spark of indignation, if not dealt with through humility and reason, can quickly burn down the whole house, spiritually and relationally.
That's a sobering progression. Okay, with that map of sinful anger laid out, we absolutely must look at the counterexample. What about holy wrath? Virtuous zeal. The classic example is Christ cleansing the temple. How do we understand that?
Yes. John chapter 2. This is the crucial model for properly ordered anger or zeal. And the first thing to grasp is, this was not Jesus losing his temper.
It wasn't an emotional outburst.
Absolutely not. Read the account closely. It was focused, deliberate, almost liturgical. It was a prophetic action carried out with full control, perfectly aligned with reason and charity.
Okay, so what made it not sinful? What was the driving motivation that kept it virtuous?
The motivation was intense. Ordered love, what the scriptures call zeal. And it seems to have been twofold. First, as the text says, zeal for your father's house consumes me. It was an offense against the glory of God. The sacred space was being desecrated, turned into a marketplace.
So love for God's honor was primary.
Yes. But second, there was also zeal for justice towards the neighbor, particularly the poor. Remember what was happening? Money changers and animal sellers were operating inside the temple courts. They were often exploiting pilgrims, especially the less wealthy ones, charging unfair exchange rates for temple currency and inflated prices for sacrificial animals.
So it was also about economic injustice and exploiting the vulnerable in a holy place.
Exactly. So contrast this with sinful anger. Sinful anger gets triggered because a finite, often personal good like my ego, my comfort, my schedule gets violated and I react disproportionately.
Right.
Christ's virtuous zeal, on the other hand, was triggered by offenses against the ultimate goods. The glory of God and fundamental justice for other people, his values were perfectly ordered.
And the action itself, overturning tables, driving people out, that seems intense.
It was intense, but look at the spiritual economy. He was willing to cause a temporary, lesser disruption, flipping tables, scattering coins, which is a lesser evil compared to desecration and exploitation, in order to restore the infinitely greater goods of the temple's sanctity and justice for the poor.
So the action was proportional to the real values at stake, not just his personal feelings.
Precisely. It was entirely rational, proportional, and aimed at a goal far beyond personal satisfaction. That's the internal check we constantly need. Is my indignation rising to defend my little kingdom, or is it genuinely aimed at restoring God's order and true justice? Big difference.
That's a huge takeaway. Okay, let's move into section 2. We've diagnosed the symptom disordered anger. Now we need to dig deeper to the spiritual roots. The sources seem unanimous on this. Sinful anger is usually a symptom of something deeper.
Yes, a much more pervasive infection in the soul. And that infection, the primary pathogen, is pride.
Pride, superbia, the head of the vices.
Exactly. Pope St. Gregory the Great really emphasized this. He saw pride as the original sin, essentially that desire to be like God, the refusal to accept our creatureliness, our limits.
Okay, intellectually, I get that pride is bad, but how does it specifically generate anger? What's the mechanism?
Well, think about what pride does psychologically. The proud person constructs this inflated image of themselves. They build an internal throne, so to speak, and place their own ego, their own will upon it.
Okay, the imperial self.
Right. And because they're sitting on this self-made throne, they develop expectations. They expect reality and other people to conform to their judgment, their desires, their sense of what's due to them. They expect their comfort zone to remain undisturbed.
And when life inevitably doesn't cooperate, when someone else has a different plan or opinion.
Exactly. When reality or another person's free will thwarts that imperial expectation, the proud person doesn't just see it as a normal frustration or a setback. They experience it as an intolerable affront, a violation of their sovereign rights, an insult to their inflated self-importance.
And the anger that erupts is what? The defense mechanism.
It's the violent, often desperate defense of that fragile, idolized self. It's the roar of the petty tyrant whose decree has been ignored. It's fundamentally about defending the ego's perceived territory.
Wow. When you put it like that, it makes so much sense why humility is the only real cure.
It has to be. This connects directly to what the Desert Fathers taught. One of them famously said the whole spiritual struggle boils down to learning two things. First, that there is a God.
Okay.
And second, that I am truly not him.
Chuckles slightly. Simple but profound.
Isn't it? And sinful anger, in many ways, is the loud, emotional refusal to truly learn and accept that second lesson. It's insisting, no, my will should be supreme here.
The Desert Fathers had such deep psychological insight. They talked about the logis moi, these evil thoughts or passional suggestions.
Yeah.
How do they understand the logis mos of anger specifically?
Right. Evagrius Ponticus was the master cartographer here. He mapped out these 8 primary logis moi that assault the soul. These are like the initial seeds or suggestions that try to incite sin.
And the goal of their ascetic life, their ascesis, was something called apatheia.
Yes, apatheia, which crucially doesn't mean apathy or being unfeeling. It means inner freedom. It means mastery over the disordered passions so they don't cloud the intellect or block our ability to love God and neighbor. It's the state of inner stillness and purity of heart.
Okay, so within that framework, how do they view anger, or orge, as they called it in Greek?
They saw orge as particularly dangerous. They described it vividly sometimes as a glutton of the heart, constantly feeding on old wounds and fantasies of revenge. It's insatiable.
A glutton of the heart. That's powerful imagery.
Isn't it? They also stressed how uniquely blinding anger is. More than many other passions, it just shuts down the intellect, destroys the clarity you need for prayer or rational thought, And they saw it as a gateway drug, so to speak.
How so?
Once anger gets a foothold, it quickly opens the door to other destructive passions, especially sadness, bitterness, and eventually that deep-seated poisonous resentment called rancor. It creates a whole negative ecosystem in the soul.
This really highlights why just trying anger management techniques like counting to 10 or deep breathing often isn't enough from a deep spiritual perspective, right?
Right.
It might manage the outburst.
But it doesn't address the root cause, the food source. It's like treating a fever with a cool cloth, but ignoring the underlying infection.
So the Desert Fathers saw anger as part of a bigger problem.
Exactly. A diseased ecology within the soul. If the soil is thick with pride and self-love, then any little spark in offense and inconvenience is going to cause anger to flare up. True, lasting healing requires changing the whole environment.
An ecological shift.
Yes, you have to attack the pride, cultivate humility, basically make the heart soil inhospitable to the seeds of anger. Otherwise, you're just constantly pulling weeds while the soil remains toxic.
Were there specific practices they used to cultivate this interchange beyond just understanding it?
Oh, absolutely. Their approach was intensely practical, involving rigorous ascesis. It wasn't just head knowledge.
Like what kind of practices?
Well, besides the constant prayer and recourse to the sacraments, they heavily emphasized things that directly undercut the ego. For instance, the remembrance of death, regularly meditating on your own mortality and the coming judgment.
Memento mori.
Exactly. That practice alone has a stunning ability to put perceived slights and earthly ambitions into perspective. Suddenly, that insult someone threw at you seems pretty insignificant when you're contemplating eternity. The vanity of honor and revenge just kind of evaporates.
It relativizes everything else.
It does. They also stress the practice of accepting insults willingly, even embracing humiliation silently as a form of penance and a way to crush pride. And the cultivation of tears, not necessarily emotional tears, but a deep contrition and awareness of one's own sinfulness and dependence on God's mercy.
Wow. Accepting insults as penance. That goes right to the heart of dismantling pride, doesn't it?
It's radical. It's about deliberately choosing to make the heart less reactive, less defensive, by starving the ego that fuels the anger. It's about cultivating that fertile ground for humility and grace instead.
Okay, so that leads us perfectly into section 3, the arsenal of virtues. If pride is the disease and anger the symptom, we need the medicine. We need the virtues that counteract wrath. You mentioned humility, but the outline lists the Trinity: meekness, patience, and humility. Let's start with meekness. Monsutudo.
Right. Meekness is the virtue that directly moderates the passion of anger itself. And we absolutely have to rescue this word from its modern, weak connotation.
Yeah, meek today sounds like doormat. Timid, passive, easily pushed around.
Exactly. But that's not the classical or biblical understanding. The sources, especially when looking at the Greek word prautos used in the Beatitudes, blessed are the meek, define it as gentle strength. Think of it as power under perfect control.
Power under control. I like that. Can you give an analogy?
Maybe think of a powerful wild stallion versus a perfectly trained war horse. Both have immense strength, right? But the wild stallion's power is chaotic, potentially destructive. The war horse possesses the same power, but it's entirely submitted to the rider's will, calm, focused, effective.
So meekness isn't the absence of the power associated with anger, the irascible power, but the perfect harnessing of that power.
Precisely. Harnessed by reason and charity, under the command of Christ working through our will. And it's crucial to remember this isn't just about developing a nice temperament through effort alone.
How so?
St. Paul lists meekness, prautos, as a fruit of the Holy Spirit in Galatians 5. That tells us it's primarily a work of divine grace. If we're really struggling with anger, fundamentally, we're struggling because we need more of the Holy Spirit's transformative grace active in our lives. We can't just will ourselves to be meek.
That's humbling in itself. So what's the specific function of meekness in our internal life? How does it operate moment to moment?
It allows for just indignation. It doesn't mean you don't recognize or feel appropriately about evil or injustice. You can and should. But meekness prevents that initial justified feeling from immediately degenerating into sinful, excessive, vengeful anger.
It acts like a governor on the engine.
A governor, or maybe a sophisticated braking system. It ensures the response stays proportional, stays temperate. It keeps the focus on the actual good that needs restoring or the correction that needs giving rather than just lashing out. It's really a key part of the cardinal virtue of temperance, keeping things in balance.
And the ultimate model is Jesus himself saying, "Learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart." If he embodies perfect strength, then meekness must be part of that strength.
Absolutely. Which brings us smoothly to the second virtue in our arsenal, patience or patientia.
Okay, patience. How does this differ from meekness?
If meekness governs the quality or intensity of the response to provocation, patience governs the duration of our endurance. Especially when facing evils or suffering, it's about constancy.
St. Augustine had some deep insights here, defining it as the ability to endure evils with constancy of soul. What's the core spiritual logic he saw in patience, or the lack thereof?
Augustine's point is profound. He says the impatient person fundamentally refuses to suffer a temporal evil. Could be an insult, a physical pain, a delay, an inconvenience, some offense. They find the immediate discomfort unbearable.
Okay.
And because they refuse to endure that lesser temporary evil with constancy, they often fall immediately into a greater spiritual evil, the sin of anger, harsh words, resentment, maybe even actions they deeply regret. They essentially trade their soul's peace, maybe even risk eternal goods, just to escape a moment of discomfort.
Wow, that's a stark calculation. Prioritizing immediate relief over lasting spiritual health. That feels like the definition of spiritual immaturity.
It really is. Patience is the spiritual stamina required to endure the unpleasantness, the friction of life, the offenses, without letting the passion take over and dictate a sinful response. It maintains that constancy of soul Augustine talks about.
And there's a connection to wisdom too, isn't there?
Yes, Augustine also said, there is no place for wisdom where there is no patience. Think about it. Anger is inherently impulsive, hasty, blind. It makes us say and do things without thinking. Patience creates that crucial pause, that inner calm.
With a space for reason to step back in.
Exactly. It allows reason, charity, prudence, and true wisdom to guide the response, rather than raw, immediate impulse. Patience buys you time to choose the good.
Meekness for the quality, patience for the duration. Okay. And finally, we circle back to the root. Humility. Humilitas as the direct antidote to pride.
Yes. If pride is the source, humility is the cure. And what is humility? Fundamentally, it's truth.
Truth, how so?
It's simply recognizing reality, the reality of our condition as created beings, utterly dependent on God for everything, our existence, our next breath, any good we might do. It's acknowledging, as Christ said, that without me, you can do nothing. It's not about groveling or false self-deprecation. It's just seeing things as they are.
Connecting back to the Desert Fathers, knowing there is a God and I am not him.
Precisely. The word itself comes from humus, meaning earth or soil. We are earthlings, made from dust, destined to return to dust. That perspective changes everything.
And how does embracing that truth lead to the inner peace needed to combat anger?
Because the truly humble heart doesn't feel entitled. It doesn't build its sense of worth or its peace on external validation, what others think, how they treat us. Pride makes us hypersensitive to slights because we're desperately defending this fragile, inflated self-image we've constructed.
Right. Any criticism feels like an attack on the whole structure.
But the humble person, they know their own faults probably better than anyone criticizing them. So when an offense or insult comes, they can absorb it without that violent defensive reaction. There's no precarious ego statue to protect. They might even think, well, they're right about that, or perhaps more profoundly, if they only knew the worst of me, they'd say much more.
Slight chuckle. That's a radical freedom, isn't it? It just deflates the power of the offense.
It completely disarms most provocations. And of course, the supreme model of this, the perfect antidote to Satan's proud, I will not serve, is the Blessed Virgin Mary. Her response to the most overwhelming, life-altering call imaginable was pure humility. Behold, I am the handmaid of the Lord. Let it be done to me according to your word. Total self-gift, total trust, zero entitlement.
The ultimate yes, born from humility. Okay, that lays out the virtues beautifully. Now let's get practical in section 4, strategies and spiritual remedies. We have the diagnosis, we know the virtues to aim for, but this is a daily battle. We need a toolkit. Where do we start?
The absolute first line of defense, drawing heavily again on the wisdom of the Desert Fathers, is what they called custodia cordis, guarding the heart.
Guarding the heart. What does that entail?
It means constant vigilance. It's about training yourself to be aware of the very first movements of your soul, the initial logismoi. You have to become like a sentinel posted at the gate of your heart, watching for the first seeds of anger, irritation, resentment, impatience, and rejecting them the instant they appear.
Don't wait until they've sprouted.
Exactly. So many of us become victims of our passions because we ignore them until they're a raging fire, a tidal wave. Guarding the heart means dealing with the spark, the ripple.
Okay, but practically speaking, in a busy, noisy modern life, how do you do that? How do you maintain that kind of vigilance?
It requires cultivating moments of interior silence, even brief ones throughout the day. A moment between tasks, maybe. It means developing a habit of immediately questioning your internal judgments about people or situations that annoy you.
So instead of instantly assuming the worst about why someone did something.
Right. Instead of letting the thought, they did that deliberately just to spite me, run unchecked, Custodia Cordis prompts you to ask, wait, is that interpretation charitable? Is it even true? Or am I just seeking my own justification here? It's like constantly checking the spiritual weather inside. It makes your soul more sensitive, able to detect that subtle shift from peace to irritation before it escalates.
Spiritual triage, catching it early. Okay. Next in the toolkit, the power of sacred scripture. Are there specific verses that act like rules for managing this inner fire?
Absolutely. One of the golden rules comes from the Epistle of James, chapter 1. It's incredibly practical.
What does it say?
James says, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires.
Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. Let's break that down. Quick to listen.
That immediately forces you out of your own head, out of your internal narrative of being the victim. It requires you to actually try and understand the other person or the situation first.
Okay, slow to speak.
That imposes the discipline we talked about, patience and meekness, on our most dangerous tool, the tongue. It prevents those hasty, reactive words we almost always regret.
And the result of those two is slow to become angry.
Exactly. It's the natural fruit of listening before judging and thinking before speaking. James connects it directly to outcomes. Human anger, our reactive, unbridled anger, simply doesn't achieve God's purposes. It doesn't build justice or righteousness.
Powerful. But there's an even more intense command, almost a spiritual warfare directive, regarding anger from St. Paul in Ephesians, isn't there?
Yes, Ephesians 4.26-27. This one is critical. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil.
Do not let the sun go down on your anger. We hear that often, sometimes as relationship advice, but Paul links it directly to giving the devil an opportunity. What's the deep spiritual thread here?
This is much more than just advice for marital harmony, though it helps there too. St. Paul is pointing to a serious spiritual reality. When anger, a grudge, resentment, bitterness over an injury is held onto deliberately, carried overnight, allowed to fester, it transforms.
This forms into what?
Into rancor, deep-seated bitterness. This state creates a genuine spiritual wound in the soul. It's like a pocket of darkness, disorder, negativity. And the sources, including the fathers, are clear. The enemy, the devil, actively seeks out these kinds of breaches, these areas of unhealed spiritual damage.
So unresolved anger literally creates an opening.
Yes. A persistent, festering wound of bitterness acts like a spiritual foothold, an open door, a welcome mat, as the outline says, for a demonic influence. The enemy can exploit that negativity, amplify it, use it to poison our relationship with God and with others. It's an invitation to spiritual oppression.
There casts the nightly examination of conscience in a whole new light. It's not just about ticking off sins.
Not at all. Making a regular habit, especially before sleep, of examining your conscience, sincerely forgiving anyone who has offended you, and seeking reconciliation, even if only internally at first, becomes an essential act of spiritual warfare and basic soul hygiene. You're actively closing potential breaches, sealing the cracks before darkness can seep in.
Wow. Okay, so that's non-negotiable spiritual maintenance. What about the more direct food and medicine for the soul, the sacraments? How do they help specifically with anger? Let's start with confession, reconciliation.
We often focus on confession for mortal sins, rightly so, but we drastically underestimate its power against habitual venial sins like chronic impatience or outbursts of anger.
What specific grace do we get in confession for something like anger?
Several things happen. First, the priest, acting in persona Christi, grants absolution, forgiving the sin and restoring the bond of charity that was damaged. That's huge. But second, we receive what theology calls sacramental grace. And this grace is specific.
Specific how?
It includes a particular strengthening grace that targets the very weakness underlying the sin we confessed. So if you confess patterns of anger, you receive grace specifically designed to fortify your will against that tendency, to help you control your temper, to heal the roots of that irritation.
So it's not just wiping the slate clean. It's like getting a spiritual booster shot targeted at that specific problem area.
That's a great analogy. It weakens the grip of the bad habit, vice, and strengthens the corresponding virtue, meekness, patience. It provides divine power precisely where our human effort keeps failing. Frequent, humble confession of anger, even the small stuff, is one of the most potent weapons we have to break those cycles.
That's incredibly encouraging. Okay, what about the Eucharist, often called the medicine of immortality? How does receiving communion combat the disorder of anger?
Remember, sinful anger stems from a disordered sensitive appetite, usually rooted in pride and excessive self-love. Now, what happens in the Eucharist? We receive Christ himself, his body, blood, soul, and divinity.
Okay.
Critically, Christ's human soul, united to his divinity, is perfectly ordered. His human passions, including the capacity for righteous indignation, were always perfectly subject to his reason and his divine will. His Sacred Heart is the epitome of ordered love and strength.
So when we receive him, his perfect order has an effect on our disorder.
Exactly. It's like spiritual therapy at the deepest level. That substantial union with Christ's perfectly ordered soul exerts a kind of therapeutic recalibrating effect on our own disordered passions. The peace, the strength, the immense charity radiating from Christ himself begins to purify the very self-love that fuels our anger.
It's like absorbing peace and order directly from the source.
Yes. We're uniting ourselves to the Prince of Peace. Receiving communion with faith and devotion is meant to gradually reshape our inner landscape, refining our spiritual appetites, calming the storms, making our hearts more like his. It's the ultimate transformation from the inside out.
Amazing. Okay, lastly in our toolkit, specific prayers. Beyond just general prayer, are there targeted ones? The outline mentions the invocation to the Sacred Heart.
A very simple but powerful one. Jesus, meek and humble of heart, make our hearts like unto thine. It's a classic ejaculation, a short, dart-like prayer.
What makes it effective?
It does two things beautifully. It acknowledges the source of the virtues we need, Christ's own Sacred Heart, and it's a direct petition, recognizing we can't do this ourselves. We're asking him, the divine physician, to perform heart surgery on us, essentially, to reshape our proud, angry hearts into copies of his meek and humble one. Saying at the moment you feel irritation rising can be incredibly grounding.
Asking for the transplant, basically.
In a way, yes. And then, for tackling the root problem of pride head on, there's the Litany of Humility, often attributed to Cardinal Mary Delval.
Ah, yes, that one is challenging.
It is famously challenging because it's like a precision spiritual weapon aimed directly at the ego. It systematically asks God to deliver us not just from sin, but from the desire for things the ego craves. The desire of being esteemed, loved in a worldly sense, honored, preferred, consulted, approved.
Oof. Yeah, those are the things our pride feeds on, the things that make us angry when we don't get them.
Exactly. Praying that litany sincerely and persistently is an act of spiritual warfare against the very foundation of pride. It's asking God to help us dismantle the false self that insists on its own rights and importance. It clears the ground for the kind of deep, stable peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances, the peace the world can't give, and the peace that anger destroys.
A tough prayer, but maybe a necessary one for this fight. Okay, let's move to our final section, Section 5. Christ, our model. We need to ground all this theory and practice in him.
Absolutely. If we want to overcome wrath and cultivate meekness and fortitude, we have to contemplate the perfect model, Jesus Christ himself. And perhaps counterintuitively, his greatest strength wasn't always shown in overt power.
You mean like the cleansing of the temple? That was powerful.
It was, and it showed righteous zeal. But consider his passion. Think about the eloquent silence of Christ, standing before Pilate, before Herod, before the Sanhedrin, facing false accusations, mockery, injustice, and much of the time, he was silent.
Why was that silence so powerful? It could look like weakness or defeat.
But it wasn't. It wasn't apathy, and it certainly wasn't defeat. It was supreme self-control. It was the profound silence of truth itself, refusing to engage with lies on their own terms. It demonstrated that his peace, his identity, was anchored entirely in his Father, not in human opinion or earthly power. It couldn't be shaken by external chaos or injustice.
People at the time expected a Messiah who would fight back, right?
Yeah.
Use force against Rome, against the corrupt authorities.
Exactly. They wanted overt, immediate, forceful power. Instead, Christ revealed the power of God primarily through patience, through silent endurance, through entrusting his entire cause to the Father. He demonstrated that true strength often lies not in immediate retaliation, but in the capacity to absorb evil and injustice without letting it poison your own soul, all for the love of a greater good, the Father's will and our salvation.
He accepted the offense without internal combustion.
Perfectly put. And this leads us to the absolute pinnacle of this teaching, the ultimate victory over wrath and vengeance, his words from the cross.
Amidst the greatest possible injustice.
The greatest injustice in human history. Betrayed, abandoned, tortured, unjustly condemned, mocked by the very people he came to save. And his response, not a curse, not a call for legions of angels, but Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
Incredible. How does that relate to his own passion, his own anger against sin? Was it just suppressed?
Not suppressed, but perfectly channeled. His just indignation against sin, against the evil being perpetrated, wasn't ignored. It was fully integrated and transformed into an act of the highest possible intercessory love. He took all the evil, all the injustice, all the hatred directed at him, absorbed it, and responded not with anger that destroys, but with love that redeems.
He broke the cycle.
He definitively broke the infinite cycle of violence and revenge. He showed that the ultimate response to evil is not matching force with force, but absorbing it and transforming it through mercy and forgiveness. That is the final, most profound lesson on overcoming wrath. The ultimate goal isn't just managing anger. It's being transformed to the point where our response, even to injury, becomes Christ-like love.
Amazing. Okay, let's wrap up this deep dive. We started with the Thomistic diagnosis, understanding anger as a natural passion that becomes disordered, often rooted in pride.
Then we mapped out the cure, the cultivation of the opposing virtues, especially humility, patience, and meekness, recognizing these are primarily gifts of grace.
And we looked at the toolkit for the daily battle, guarding the heart, the wisdom of the Scripture, the essential grace of the sacraments, confession and Eucharist, and specific targeted prayer.
Right, all aimed at that ultimate goal, which isn't just about becoming a calmer person in a superficial sense. It's fundamentally part of the universal call to holiness. It's about conforming our restless, proud hearts to the sacred heart of Jesus. The fight against disordered anger is absolutely central to becoming alter Christus, another Christ in the world.
Beautifully summarized. And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to chew on this week. We rightly admire Christ's strength and zeal in cleansing the temple. That resonates with our sense of justice. But as we just discussed, perhaps the ultimate, the most profound, the defining demonstration of divine strength wasn't the whip and the overturned tables. Perhaps it was the silence before Pilate and the forgiveness uttered from the cross.
That radically turns our worldly notions of power upside down, doesn't it?
It really does. So here's the question. If enduring the greatest injustice with silent love and responding to hatred with mercy represents the absolute pinnacle of strength, if that's what true victory looks like, then how does embracing our own weakness, our creaturely limits, our lack of entitlement, how does embracing humility actually unlock that kind of powerful, Christ-like strength within us?
That's the paradox, isn't it? How does accepting weakness lead to the greatest strength? That's the core mystery of the spiritual life, illuminated by Christ's passion. Something profound to consider.
Indeed. A paradox that challenges so much of how our modern world thinks about power, assertiveness, and getting what's due to us. That's definitely a thought worth contemplating.